if we're to think of a common thread that links all three of this afternoon papers, I think one would be this notion of dissemination. And I think underlying Victor Mayer's topic is the dissemination of tea to China and tea culture within China, and then, oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to start again? Okay, so I'm just talking about dissemination, the tie of dissemination among these papers. And I think that underlying Victor Mayer's topic is the notion of the dissemination of tea to China and tea culture within China and beyond during the Tang period. Liu Yang discussed Chinese imagery of painting, calligraphy, and poetry on changsha wares, which were carried across vast oceans to distant lands. And Francois Louis told us about the networks of exchange that likely stretched from Chinese government officials to foreign shipping merchants. And of course, it comes as no surprise to us that dynamic trade took place during the Tang period. But what the Beilitung Shipwreck and Cargo and these papers emphasize for us is the complexity and breadth of maritime trade in the mid-9th century. With the discovery, with this discovery, we see the inspired imagination and interest of scholars. And because of their work, we're beginning to see more clearly the impact of early globalization on cultures, arts, and how they evolved. I think something else that that connects everything that was spoken on this afternoon is language, whether that language is Chinese in the form of Chinese characters, or whether it's the language of design. And thinking about that language, that idea of language, all three of you spoke about decorative clues on Beilitung Cargo. And I'd like to ask all of you if you think that that this decoration that we've been talking about might provide us with any inkling of who their consumers outside of China were or might have been.
You're asking that right now?
I'm asking that right now.
Well, oh. The decoration on the gold and silver is entirely in line with other decoration in China. So it's difficult to make any conclusions of what foreigners would have thought of it. There might be, the only thing that's unusual on this two square gold dishes, one of which you see there, is the border rim. I have not seen that on any other object at all. But whether that caters to a foreign taste or not, I can't say. So at least for the gold and silver, it's Chinese style gold and silver.
You had mentioned, I think you mentioned, I know that you didn't in your paper that I had read, that these were likely not just gifts and bribes, these gold works, but were also merchandise, clearly also merchandise. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. What leads you to believe that that they were merchandise?
Well, largely it's these scrapes and marks on the back. People wanted to make sure this is real gold and it's got the purity standards that were expected. You don't do that unless you are concerned with value. So that was my understanding of these, or interpretation of the scrapes and scratches. And the other objects, a lot of them are just like these 18 silver ingots, which was half the weight of the cargo's silver. You can't really do much other than use them as merchandise or gifts.
Okay, yeah.
The gold foil, I think, is used as raw material for various kinds of goldsmithing works, gilding Buddhist statues and so on. It had interesting additional functions, and it's not currency in that sense, though.
But it could be possible, couldn't it be possible, just getting back to the gold and the scrapes on the back, isn't it possible that those pieces were on the market within China and then might have been taken on board and then used in the form of bribery?
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Okay.
I mean, at some point, they were merchandise when this was tested and scraped multiple times. But I think these objects shift as they move from one hand to another. Yeah, we don't know when exactly that took place.
I see a great contrast between these very high-priced items, which may have been for gifting, and they're limited in number. But what really is striking to me, the contrast is with these mass-produced bowls. That's a lot of bowls, 60,000, 55,000 bowls. And that would not be as suitable for gifts. Nobody could use that. I mean, your kitchen or your dining service does not need 55,000 bowls. They were selling them, and they could make a profit by selling them to that distance. And China must have had a reputation for making good quality of that kind of bowl, and it is worth investing some effort in the decoration, and a very imaginative decoration. I think you gave a very good analysis of what strikes me is there's no two decorations that are exactly the same. They're very spontaneous, they're very creative, very evocative. So I think some of the craftsmen, the artists, were just having fun sometimes. They were seeing how many different designs they could come up with to go with all this massive number of bowls. So I do think these bowls were being sold for commercial purposes at a long distance.
To 50 liang.
I don't know, Liu Yang, I don't know if you have anything to say, but I actually have a specific question for you.
Oh, okay.
If you want.
I'm not sure if the craftsmen who made those Changsha bowls were aware that those were actually purchased by someone to ship to the Mid East, because the motifs, as Francois had mentioned, that it appears everywhere, in different mediums of art. Even the exotic mackerel, that fish, appears in different silverware. So that, as you just mentioned, that sometimes they had fun. And I actually talked to you last night, in front of two bowls, one with a very sophisticated depiction of bird, but the other was so naive. It looks like I said that it could be done by this craftsman's son, maybe, while visiting his father.
I think so. I wonder, though, because when we look at the Gongxian wares, right, we can see those motifs like the lozenge motifs that, and I know we didn't look at any or specifically look at Gongxian wares today, but there were some images of them that went up. And there are these, these lozenge motifs with the fronds, which have their origins in West Asia and seem to be appealing to that kind of an audience. And when you were showing today those bowls, and I've kind of thought about this before as well, the changsha bowls that have what you were calling the rosette in a square decoration. Have you seen any other, I mean, I think you indicated that you hadn't seen another kind of version of that on any other objects in China?
This is a very, very good observation, because I haven't thought about that until this morning when John showed me that kind of squarish design. I wonder if there's any inspiration from that kind of design. I wonder if there's any link between this kind of squarish rosette with that design, because I really haven't seen this elsewhere in a Tang decorative art.
Which makes me wonder whether or not, in fact, those craftsmen were creating some objects to special order. I mean, clearly we know that among the changsha bowls, there are fewer of those that have the bird motifs or the makara motifs, those kinds of lozenge motifs, but you have a lot of those ones with the landscapes and the clouds and all that kind of thing, which may be more generically appealing everywhere. And I also think, I've always wondered whether or not some of that changsha ware was bound for somewhere in Southeast Asia, even if there are not enormous finds of changsha ware in Southeast Asia, there are some finds of them. So clearly some of it was being exported, and something like, motif like the makara, while it was popular in China, it was also really popular in Southeast Asia in a number of different places. So yeah, I think it's just something else to think about.
There was one specific motif that does not show in the bowl, but very often seen in the yule. You have few in the exhibition,
Yeah.
which Chinese scholars name it yezao, or kind of dates.
Dates.
Yes,
Yeah.
that does not appear in any other decorative art in during that time. It only appears in this type of yule. So Chinese scholars suggested that it could be kind of, or influence, whether it's influence or kind of.
Made to order for
That's right,
that
yes,
audience.
yes.
Yeah. So for Victor, I really like, your whole story, and I actually do buy into it, but at the same time, I kind of want to play devil's advocate here.
Why don't you go ahead?
So I don't know if we can get the image of that bowl back up on the screen or not, but when you look at that bowl, right, you have your character, your Tu character, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's surrounded by clouds. And the clouds it's surrounded by are those clouds that are kind of those linger-shaped clouds, right? So
What kind of shape?
linger, like the
It's kind of spiral.
kind of
right?
like the root, like the magic
Oh,
mushrooms.
linger,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
So
fungus.
fungus. So since that is, at least certainly, I know later on in China, well, earlier in China too, that there's kind of that Taoist association there, as opposed to
Did you say
Taoist,
Taoist?
because of the medicinal or the longevity evoking qualities of linger fungus. It seems like it might have more of a Taoist association than a Buddhist association. And so if it has a Taoist association and 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 Tu is a medicinal tea that might have some, sort of medical proponents. Could it be Tu?
I doubt it. But anyway, okay, so I have taught what I call a Buddho-Taoist seminar upon occasion. I don't know, maybe Agnes took it. I taught it about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And so Buddhism and Taoism were very closely intertwined. But when I look at this bowl, as far as I know, it's unique, okay? There's only one bowl that says tea bowl on it. And I think it was just kind of whimsical, serendipitous that somebody wrote that. And I think I look upon those cloud motifs or the Lingzhi as this almost whimsical. They're just serendipitous, that almost like doodles for in contrast to the tea bowl writing. But the writing is actually fairly intentional. It's fairly clear. I mean, they were trying to think of all sorts of different things to put on the bowls. They didn't want any two bowls to be exactly the same. But somebody, this would be very early, somebody drank tea. And because that expression, chajanzi, occurs a lot in Zen dialogues, and it doesn't occur in Taoist texts. So it was developing in a Chan environment. So the other cloud, the Lingzhi, the fungus or whatever it is, I think that was just decoration. The real message is and it's not even a very deep message. It's not like we're shipping 60,000 tea bowls to the Middle East. No, because I told you the people in the Middle East were not drinking tea. And neither were the people in Southeast Asia drinking tea. That's another point I didn't make in my talk. But I actually started my project, The True History of Tea, with the intention of demonstrating that tea drinking began in India, not China. And so I really thought tea is such an important part of Indian culture. And let me tell you, I'm going to use a real American vernacular term. I was really bummed out when I found no evidence for tea drinking in India before the 20th century. And that Indians essentially learned how to drink tea from the British. Unbelievable. Yes. I should know that. I couldn't even find a Sanskrit word for tea. I could not find a Sanskrit word. Now, what's extremely interesting, in Assam, tea grows naturally. But what did the Austroasiatics, what did they do with tea? I mean, what did they do with the tea plant, Camellia sinensis? They made fermented salad. And you can get it in Burmese restaurants, probably in New York. You can get it in San Francisco. They didn't drink it. The Chinese taught people how to make tea into a beverage and drink it. They taught people how to infuse it. So it's Buddhist, it's Zen, but it's not too closely connected with those Lingzhi. Would you agree?
I agree with you because this kind of motif, as I show in my lecture, that it's kind of a ubiquitous motif. It appears everywhere. It's just the most common, most popular motif see on the changsha bowl.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the floor now, Jenny. Oh, hold on. Let's just wait for the microphone to come around.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Jenny Liu. I wanted to ask about the function of these objects that you've talked about. For example, the bowls, there's so many bowls, as you say. So what would people at the destination point be doing with these bowls? Would you have any, not tea, for coffee? I mean, what would it be for? And then in terms of the silver and gold, I was just wondering, I mean, I haven't examined the pieces myself, but just looking at the pictures, it seems like there are degrees of fineness and roughness to the silver and gold. Like the earring and the bracelet is pretty rough, right? And then the plates are, some of them are very fine, but the faminsi things, for example, are somewhat rough compared to the hejiachun, right? So would you say that and you say that the faminsi is sort of imperial culture, and so maybe with the ship, it's imperial in the court, but maybe that was used more for ritual purposes, maybe being from the temple. So I was just wondering about that in terms of ritual and the fineness of the make, and then what the bowls are for. Thank you.
About 15 years ago, when I engaged in the study of those, I had spent several weeks in New Zealand, Nelson, when those works were stored in a warehouse. I looked at many bowls, although they all look same, but they actually are different size. Some are small, some are large. You might think that they could be domestically used for, like rice bowl. However, but as that specific example show us, they were used for tea. I mean, like tea, tajans or tujans that you mentioned. But they definitely mean to use to be, as a kitchen utensil. But to that destination, I have no idea what they are going to use.
I think those bowls were all-purpose bowls. And I don't even think, you can use the bowl for soup, for noodles, for rice, for goulash, anything. So a bowl is just, you can have liquid in it, you can have a salad, anything. So I don't even believe this chajanzi was really a tea bowl, because I don't think the Chinese were drinking tea that much. They were in the South, perhaps. Maybe this one was a peculiar tea bowl, but the mass of those those bowls were just for general purpose, all purpose.
Question, Francoise. You spoke of the gold work being principally. Are we not?
I don't think people can hear you.
You spoke of the gold work being essentially imperial or associated with the elite in Xi'an and that area. What do we know about commercial workshops producing gold in the great port cities, Hangzhou, Yangzhou, for example? Were there commercial workshops producing gold work of a similar quality for merchant clients or local elite, quite independently of the people who were working and patronizing the court?
Yeah, we don't know a lot of detail about this, but we know that the court workshops hired craftsmen from the south. There were various centers we could identify, not just Yangzhou, but Yangzhou seems to have been a big production center. And yes, I think they worked for whatever clients could afford to buy these things from them. In terms of quality, to the Jenny's question, the objects at Faminsi that look a bit rough are the ones that were made in the imperial workshops. The piece that I showed you that was sent from the south was really much more elegantly worked, and those were not court workshops in Yangzhou. So that much we know, but we don't have clear textual descriptions. What we have are these quotes or these stories that I mentioned of prefects, local prefects, being forced into making things for the court. But the court left it up to them to find money to do that, and they went to whatever public crafts men were available, it seems. Is that the answer?
Go ahead, Brian.
So just wanted to make a comment on this subject of the end users and the value of the ceramics. We don't even have to speculate. Arabic texts from the 10th and early 11th century state quite clearly that they were used for cooking, for dining, and occasionally for display at state occasions. There's a nice article by Alain Georges, a recent one where he talks about ceramics, and there are some other references as well if anyone's curious. But one facet maybe that we could keep in mind is that while the designs of some of the bowls may have deliberately appealed to tastes in the Middle East, just the fact that these were made in China and the high reputation of Chinese wares among elites in Islamic lands, I think would have ensured a high sale value for them. It's a time where elites in those areas really have a great appreciation for these kinds of commodities. And they say so. There's a guy, Ath-Thalabi, who has a long passage where he praises the wares of China from ceramics to mirrors, describes them, and I can give you the reference if you like.
Thank you. There's a question in the back here.
I'm Ching Yuan, a retired historian. I was curious about the gold, where the gold comes from. And I wonder, nobody discussed the anti-Buddhist persecution of Tang Wudi between 840 and 845. Could it be that some of the gold come from the monasteries, in other words, used for other purposes? And this would be a possible source, as well as some other valuable objects. With regard to tea, I'm thinking, this doesn't work. With regard to tea, I was just curious what did Chinese drink before Lu Yu?
Well, I can
After all, I mean,
I can
hot
tell you
water,
what they
gotta boil
drank
it.
in the Bei Wei, Toba. They were drinking curds.
Like Mongols?
No, Toba.
Toba.
In Loyang,
I see.
Tabgach.
But that's supposed to be,
They were not drinking tea. They rejected tea dramatically. They would not drink it. They made fun of people who drank tea. And I'm talking about Loyang.
okay. But you're not
You
talking
can-
about other places. You're not talking about other
Loyang was the capital.
in the Tang, it was Xi'an, wasn't it? I was just curious
No, but
about
I'm
my
talking.
ignorance.
Oh, of course. I talked about the 6th century,
Oh, okay.
and it was rejected. Now, we talked about Famansi several times. The first important tea set is from Famansi. Very elaborate, but it's imperial. And so this is at the stage when tea is just becoming popular. And it started from the high status.
Oh, the question about the gold provenance, there were various places in China where gold was mined or washed out of rivers, in Sichuan province in particular. There's gold in Yunnan. Guangdong had gold. But this gold in the Belitung ship predates the Buddhist persecutions, so
Yeah.
it can't come from the monasteries.
Okay, we have time for one more question here on the right-hand side.
Could we get some enlightenment on how did... Hello? Can we get some enlightenment? How did Chinese drink tea? Did they ever grind up the tea leaves into powder and whip it up? Or is that a Japanese version?
That's the way the Chinese drank it first. There's a tea grinder in Famansi, the same kind of tea grinder that you can see and wall paintings in Song Liao Jin. So yeah, they were whipping it, they ground it. Same way.
When did they start to drink it by infusing hot water on the tea leaves?
Well, even if you make it into a powder, you have to use hot water. It's still a kind of drawing out the flavor and the properties of it with hot water. But they didn't use loose leaf, whole leaf tea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we'll take one more.
This is more tea. What exactly are curds?
Ah!
And in from a different kiln, there was something that looked like a cup set on top of a raised saucer. Would that have been a teacup? Could you hear
Who are
me?
you talking? Who are you talking to?
I can recite Little Miss Muffet.
Yeah, eating her curds in a way.
Curds from milk?
Yeah, they drank milk a lot. But also they drank alcoholic beverages, and that would make good sense to, but they were unbelievably to all, it just doesn't seem to ring true for Chinese, that the Chinese were not drinking tea in the 6th, 5th, 4th centuries. They just started to drink tea in the 7th or 8th century, 8th century. It's hard to believe.
So in terms of in the exhibition, for example, there are some examples of Xingware, Xing cups that sit on Xing stands, and there are certainly in Liao Dynasty tomb murals, we see that type of cup being used for drinking tea. I imagine it could have been used for wine as well.
Certainly in the 9th, 10th, 11th century, you get a lot of evidence for tea drinking in China. Massive.
May I have the last word?